You may have noticed that today's readings were pretty familiar from Mark. It's because we happen to have read them 3 weeks ago and 2 weeks ago. And the way that it lined up with aligning with the Sunday services and then with the Saturday service was that the Sunday lectionary called for it to be broken up, and today the Saturday lectionary called for it to be held together. So one thing that says when you do something twice like that is you probably need to throw some attention to it. And the thing that I notice here as well is that it really goes together as a passage of 13 verses. I mean, if you look in your Bible and you go by the holy thing called titles, it says here Jesus sends out the 12 before verse 6 is over. So when you go through that passage and you read through 6, you have to go to the next section title, and that makes you just want to keep reading, doesn't it? And so today we're looking at it, this whole passage, as a whole chunk instead of broken up into two parts, and you'll see that it is kind of important to keep it together. Because this whole part is talking about effectiveness in ministry. Effectiveness in going out. And we start out by looking at Jesus returning to his hometown. Now, Mark is the shortest account of this. Luke has a really long section where he goes in and he reads the passage from Isaiah. But this is simply, he went, he preached, and he couldn't do much. It's kind of tough to go back to your family to be able to effectively minister. It's one of the toughest areas to work in. At the same time, they're the closest people to your heart, aren't they? Your immediate family. It hurts you when you see them struggling, when you see them falling away. It hurts you when they hurt. But even Jesus wasn't able to go back to his hometown, to his family. But look at how his family referred to him. If you go back with me and look at this, Mark gives a little background. Mark chapter 3, verse 21. Chapter 3, verse 21 says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. That does not sound like a very good affirmation. Then if you go further, you go to verse 31, this is how they refer to him, and here's Jesus' response. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived, standing outside. They sent someone in to call him. The crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother and my brothers, he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my mother, brother, and sister, and mother. They didn't want him to do what he was doing because, in many ways, it may have embarrassed them. There's a story of a girl who was with her father in the mall, and some people were asking him to sing. And so he obliged them. He got up and he sang, and she was just put her hand on her head and said, Dad, you just do this to embarrass me. It was a famous singer that was singing, I believe it was Billy Joel. Did it not for her. He did it because his fans were asking for it. Jesus wasn't going out healing people to embarrass his family. He did it because God called him to it. He did it because that's what he was supposed to do. That's what he was called to do. That's why he was on earth. But let's think about this. When he went back to his hometown, the people in his hometown knew his background. I mean, they didn't know all of it, obviously. They didn't know about the angel visiting Mary. They didn't know about the angel visiting Joseph. They didn't know that he was the Son of God. They just knew that Mary and Joseph got married. And when you get married in that culture, you're supposed to be married for a year, and as the nativity story says, live together in every way except for what creates children. And just a few months into the marriage, 6 months later, she was very pregnant. And so the people in the town either thought they didn't keep the marriage vow, or Mary got pregnant by somebody else. And with Joseph staying with her, it made them wonder, it made them question, it made them make fun potentially. You don't even know who your daddy is. Maybe some of the things that they said. How can we accept the words of this man? Who are you? How can we know your family? They're not that great. They cause problems. And we've been giving them a hard time, which is part of why they went to say he's crazy, he's out of his mind, stop it. So it was really tough. And Jesus gives us answers. He says, only in his hometown, among his relatives, in his own house is a prophet without honor. Anywhere else he could minister. Anywhere else he could go. Now that doesn't mean that they didn't come eventually follow him, because they all did. They all eventually saw who he was. But remember, Jesus had said later on, though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. But upon his death on the cross, and upon the ripping of the veil of the curtain, God opened their minds so that they could see. God opened their ears so they could hear. And they had what is known as an epiphany. And they were able to know that what Jesus had said was true, and that the hope that Jesus gave was not just for them, but for the whole world. The people in that town were not able to receive healing. They were not able to see any miracles because they had a lack of faith. Because they had no faith in Jesus. Because he was simply Mary's son. He was merely the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. Just the big brother of these kids who were still in town, and for some reason he ran off to do his own thing, giving us Nazarenes an even worse name. But because of that, they didn't have faith. Remember, you see over and over again before this, you see a couple of really big miracles happen. You see the miracle of the girl that was raised from the dead. You see demons driven out. You see all these miracles. You see the woman who had the flow of blood healed. You see all this go on. And then you get to this chapter, he comes to his hometown, and it says he does heal a few sick people. But there was a lack of faith. When it comes back to this, when it comes to healing, when it comes to effective ministry, it can be Jesus himself walking up to you. And unless you believe, you're not going to be healed. Unless you believe, you're not going to receive. Sometimes it's easy to receive from people you don't know. From people you haven't seen before. People whose background you don't know. Sometimes it makes it easier. So Jesus, in this next section, sends out his disciples. He takes them and sends them out 2 by 2. There's a couple significant reasons for this. First off, as you go out and you travel, it's always good to have a companion to help you in case anything goes wrong. Also, in the Jewish culture, in order for testimony to be valid, there had to be 2 people. So they could perform miracles, they could heal people, but if there wasn't 2 of them, their testimony would not be valid. They couldn't tell anybody what had happened unless 2 people witnessed it. So they had to go out together.